everything. Lead meeting. Give it to Joe. Brilliant.
See you later. Should we hang on for a couple of minutes, do you think, Joe? Just wait for people to turn up.
It's a good shout as well, yeah. I'll share the link in the general channel as well.
Oh yeah, cool. That'd be great.
Cool. Whereabouts are you based, Joe? Are you in Scotland or?
Yeah. I'm in Edinburgh.
Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
How about yourself?
Yeah, just outside of Edinburgh, kind of East Lothian. I don't know if you know.
Oh yeah. Which way? Because we're right near Musselburgh.
Oh really? Yeah, Dunbar way. So I'm East Linton, little wee town.
Oh yeah, I know East Linton. Yeah. It's very pretty there.
It's very nice. It's it's full of old people and pubs and libraries. It's quite nice actually. It's quite quaint. But I'm staying with my parents at the moment. So just to save some money, I guess. So it's good.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's nice.
Is that where you're from then originally?
Yeah. So kind of more kind of countryside out towards Dunbar way. But I have English parents, so me and my brother and sister are first generation Scottish, so it's kind of our accent gets a little bit kind of lost sometimes in that. You can always place it, but yeah, it's a good one. But no, I love Edinburgh. That's great.
And how long have you been working for the STA now? What's the...
So just over a year. I think Charlotte's been here slightly longer than me, but we kind of originally both signed up we did like an internship through the Kickstarter scheme actually, when it was like kind of, just as the pandemic was kind of ending, it was like a government scheme that was still going on. And then after 6 months, they kind of took us on a rolling contract, if you like. And then, just now we've kind of managed to secure the full-time work, which is brilliant. So it's
nice. That's great. Is it kind of because new funding has come in, or like, I don't know how all that stuff works?
Yeah, very much so. So we've recently received some funding from the National Lottery. So it's kind of covers, I think, 2 years of work we'll be doing. So that's been, it's been a good win, that one, definitely. But we still very much do the hybrid way of working. So a couple of days in the office, a few days at home as well. So it's just quite well. It means I don't have to commute every single day in, which is
Is there a train station in East Linton, or do you go?
Yes, the building one. So it's actually due to open next February, I believe. Which is going to be great. It's not too bad on the bus. It's about 40 minutes, 50-minute ride on the bus. It's a bit more expensive. I missed the cut-off before getting a free bus pass or any of that. I spent years paying for the buses and then turned 22 when they introduced the free bus pass. So not bitter about it at all, I'll tell you.
Right. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Don't worry, you get some therapy. You'll get over it.
I'll be getting the train anyway next year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, definitely.
Cool. Shall we make a start, and then people can maybe
sure.
jump in as we're available too? Cool. So I'm going to try sharing my screen, and let's see if this works. So if I hit slideshow. Cool. Can everyone see that? It says pull request reviews in big letters.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Lovely. Cool. I don't know. I can see there's not many people here, and that's fine. I don't know if I picked like just an unpopular topic. So thank you for those of you who are here. Saves me just talking to the void. And maybe a few more people pop in. I'm also just going to pop, before I get going, I'm just going to pop a link in the chat. So this is a link to the slides. So you don't need this now, but if you want to kind of look at the slides later, there's a few links as we go through. So things that I won't be kind of clicking on, but if you want to go and like read up more on one or two things, they should be in there. So the other thing I guess to say is, so I'm on 2 screens. So if you can see I don't know if you can still see my face via Zoom, but if you do, you're probably going to see a bit of the side of my head as I kind of look at this on the screen. So apologies for that. That's the only reason why. The other thing to say is I'll try and keep a bit of an eye on the chat, but I might not see things. So yeah, if I drop out, for instance, or you can't hear me, then just unmute and shout at me. It's probably the best thing, and we'll sort that out. So, oh, let's see if that works. Right, so just a tiny bit about me. So I'm a freelance developer, mostly working with charities in the UK. I used to be in an in-house team before I went freelance about 5 years ago, and also volunteer for the STA. So working with Doogie, who's on this call, and others on the volunteer app. So what I'm going to cover today is like a little bit of background about reviewing pull requests, a little bit about the process, and then probably the biggest chunk will be some of the things you might look for when you're doing a review, a little bit about providing feedback, and then there's a time for questions at the end. But I've said and sharing because you might have your own experiences or like another way of doing things. So feel free, as we're going through, you think, oh, actually, we do something differently. Feel free to kind of chip in there. That'd be really good. The other thing, just say up front, is I'm going to be using various examples from GitHub, but GitHub, of course, is not the only way you can do pull requests and reviews. I think that pretty much everything I'm mentioning, I from experience, I've only used 1 or 2 other platforms occasionally, but I think it's probably possible if you're using Bitbucket or like Microsoft Azure or one of those other platforms. I think the things are fairly common, but apologies if anything is like a little bit specific and you're on a different platform. The other kind of caveat up front is that some of what I'm going to be saying is subjective, because I think there are different ways you can approach doing reviews of pull requests. So this is, I guess, based on like my experience and teams that I've been in, but you might work in a team where they do things differently, and that part of the talk at the end would be great if you think, actually, oh, you know, we do things another way. It'd be really good to hear from you and share that, and to feel free to disagree with anything that I'm going to say. So before I dive into details, I think that kind of this topic, and probably quite a few others, it kind of fits within team culture and also your kind of team and personal approach to developing. So I just want to mention a few things because they kind of inform all the rest of it. So I think the first one there is we are all, or should all, be kind of aiming to do our best work when we're building stuff, when we're coding things. But also, none of us is perfect. Even the most senior people like get stuff wrong. We all have off days. We all miss things. So yeah, that's definitely something to mention. I think attention to detail, that's something that I've really found is important when you're kind of working with pull requests and also when you're reviewing with them. And I think it's something I've found as a developer generally, just asking questions is a really, really good thing, because if you don't understand something, it's really good just not to be quiet, but to ask, or it's how you learn. So definitely recommend that. And I think in general, kind of looking to learn, I was talking to someone who was looking to volunteer at the STA recently. He's a senior developer, and he was saying every time he reviews a pull request, even by someone like who's in theory much more junior, he always learns something. So it's not just, you know, if you think, oh, I'm more junior, I've got to learn from the senior people. I think it works in all directions. So I think we should all always be looking to learn. And we should all, I think, be trying to encourage, support, and value other people. So kind of whatever you bring to the table, it's important. And wherever you are as a like early stages of being a developer, if you're really experienced, like we should be encouraging, supporting each other throughout. And then the last point there is, I think there's probably a healthy balance of kind of getting stuff done today. So not spending kind of ages and ages on like pull request reviews, but also kind of putting enough time and care in and thinking about how something might be used in the future. And I'll kind of touch on that a little bit again, but I think these are just some kind of broad principles for all of this stuff. And there's probably more. I'm kind of assuming if you're on this talk, you have at least like a basic idea of what a pull request is. So I'm not going to go into kind of all of that because I'm going to be talking more about the kind of review process. But just to touch on it briefly, it's, you have been working on a new feature, or maybe you're fixing something and you're kind of saying, okay, I've been working on it on this branch, this Git branch, and now I want to merge it into the main code base because I think it's ready to be reviewed, it's ready to be checked, and feeling pretty good about it. I guess also before we dive into some of it, kind of why do we bother with pull request reviews? So if you're using like a Git repository in GitHub or anywhere else, you don't have to have reviewers. You can just make it so that anyone can just merge their code straight in. In some ways, like the workflow would definitely be quicker because you could just say, right, job done. I finished my feature I'm working on, just merge it in, crack on with the next one. But I think some of the reasons why we do it is that having kind of a couple of people looking at it is better than just one person. Like it's easy to miss things. Sometimes we all make mistakes. There might be issues with our code, and having like one or two other people looking at it can be really good. Sometimes we all get a bit snowblind when we're working on something. And then also, could it be better? So it might be that what you've done is good, maybe great, but then maybe there's ways it could be improved, maybe things you haven't thought of or other suggestions. And part of all of that is, I think, is kind of sharing knowledge, sharing expertise, and that should be the kind of spirit of doing it. Is it's not being kind of told off, and it's not just a kind of tick box exercise. We're trying to kind of share knowledge as we go through. And there's a link down there at the bottom if you're interested in, you've got a repository and it's not requiring reviewers at the moment and you want to kind of set it up, there's a link at the bottom to how to do that. One other thing about kind of before you're actually publishing your pull request is kind of, are you ready to? And I think I've been guilty of doing this before myself, is sometimes you might be at a certain stage, but kind of creating a pull request or publishing one for review isn't always the best thing to do. So the first of these, maybe the ticket you're looking at or the designs you're trying to implement, maybe they're a bit unclear. I would say in that case, kind of don't rush ahead and just think, oh, I'll probably be fine, and publish a pull request and kind of try and style it out. Like talk to someone, go back to the designer, go back to someone who wrote the ticket, talk to your team, and try and get clarity on it, because it'll probably save everyone time in the long run rather than kind of going down a road that might be wrong. I once worked on a bit of, it was the kind of ordering functionality of this website, and because the ticket was a bit unclear, I was actually working on the wrong bit of it. I didn't realize until I was kind of part way down the line. So yeah, definitely save yourself some time. If you're not sure of the right approach, so you might think, okay, I understand what needs to be, like broadly kind of what needs to be done, but I don't know quite how to do it. So you could, again, talk to someone. Like you don't have to just sit on your own kind of struggling with a task. Talk to someone about it in your team if you've got one. Or if you've kind of had a go at something, you think, right, okay, I think maybe this works, and you've kind of coded it, you can create a draft pull request, and that's what that screenshot is, top right. And a draft is kind of saying, this could be ready, but it's not, I'm not publishing it for review yet. And that can be quite useful to kind of share like your progress, everything you've done with somebody, if you think you're kind of nearly there, or you may be there. Third one is something that I've seen, actually I experienced myself when, certainly when I started out as a developer, is that feeling of like, everything takes ages, I'm being slow, and that feeling of like wanting to contribute to the team. And I think a lot of that is a good instinct. You think, oh, I don't want to spending ages on this ticket and I'm holding everyone back, I'm being slow. And I've heard that from other folks who are in the volunteer app team, this STA project we're working on. I think that, yeah, that desire to get stuff done is good, but I think the thing that I've learned over the years is taking a bit of time to kind of get things right, do it the right way is usually the best. That doesn't mean spending forever on it and kind of, you know, taking days and weeks and kind of making it absolutely perfect, but kind of not rushing it out just because you feel that desire to kind of get something finished. I would say take a bit of time. And I think the time you'll save in the long run will be more, because if you kind of create things the wrong way, and like someone will have to fix it later, maybe you, maybe someone else. And then the last of the kind of red ones there is if you haven't really had time to check it through, so you kind of maybe dashed off like the code, you think it's kind of working and I'm a bit busy, and you think, oh, I'll just chuck it in as a pull request and, you know, let someone review it. I would say in those situations, it's better if you hold off and do the checking first, because there are lots of things that you might find pretty easily yourself, and you're not making someone else do just the kind of hard work of, you know, we'll come on to this, but the kind of little things that we all leave in or leave out by accident. So I would definitely recommend that. So kind of if you're feeling confident, think it's pretty good, checked it. So then on to doing a review. Oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. Let's go forwards. So you're putting in your pull request. You have there's a box where you can put in description. So these are just a few tips. There might be other things as well, but useful to put in. Describe what it does. Kind of sounds obvious, but sometimes put in a kind of, people put in like a kind of vague one-liner, and it's a bit hard to understand. Maybe a bit of why you've done it a certain way, if people would find that useful, in any other kind of context. If you're working with Jira or Trello or anything like that, add in a ticket number or a card number so people can kind of track it back to the original ticket that it's trying to fulfill. If there's a visual change, so if you're working like a website or an app, whatever, it's quite useful to include a screenshot and people can see kind of what it's meant to do. And then I certainly found it's quite useful to have like a section where you tell people how to test it locally. That might be not all pull requests kind of relate to this. Some things can't be tested locally, but if you can, might be like, what commands do I need to run? Do I need to look at a particular screen or, you know, a certain bit of data in order to check this? Just kind of make it easier for someone essentially to pick it up and check it. And one of the things you can do, certainly in GitHub, is you can use a pull request template, which will kind of add in. So you'll see on the right here, this is an example of the one we're using on the volunteer app. So it adds in some of these sections like description, what kind of changes it. There's a checklist as well. And that will do that automatically once you've got that template set up. So that might be something that you find handy. And then when you come to asking people to review, if you're doing it on GitHub, I think there's something similar in kind of other code repositories. There's this reviewer section on the right-hand side of the screen. And you can hit the reviewers cog and you can kind of pick people that you request review. So that will send them an email, which is cool. I think lots of us have kind of inboxes which are full of hundreds of emails. So that can also get lost. So it can be useful, depends on how you work as a team, but also to post it to, if you've got like a team Slack channel or some kind of equivalent of that. A team that worked in-house, we actually had an automation. So every time someone published a pull request, it automatically like notified the team channel, which was quite handy. So just kind of took the work out. But yeah, you post it yourself and link through to the pull request. It's easy for someone to find. So who can review a pull request? And I think this is certainly one that I found really difficult when I had a bit less experience. And I know from talking to other folks working on volunteer app project, I've sometimes found difficult, is particularly if like a more senior developer puts in a pull request for something that you feel it's just a bit beyond me. You know, it's not something I would know how to code myself, and I'm not, you know, I'm not sure I'm able to review that. I think I'd say in that situation, like having a look at someone else's code can be quite a good way to learn. Obviously, it's not the only way. But when you pick up a project, what you get is the kind of finished code base, or finished, you know, as much as it is to date. But actually seeing a pull request, you're just seeing the changes that people are making. So you kind of get a bit more sense of like their approach, their strategies, how they tackle the problem. So that can be useful. So that's one good reason to do it. And when we come onto the kind of list of suggestions, things you can check, I think there are loads of things that actually pretty much any developer should be able to check. I think we all can. And then the other thing is, the last point there is just by kind of jumping in and helping review a pull request, you're helping keep the project moving. So I think quite a common setup, although it varies, is you might have a rule set up that a pull request needs at least 2 reviewers, 2 people to check it and approve it before it can go through. Now, if there's usually fewer senior developers than anyone else. So if you're the senior developer and you put something in and you're kind of waiting for other senior developers to review it, that can take a while. But if more, people from all levels of the team jump in, then that kind of helps keep things moving. But I think also just your view on it, even if you're not as experienced, I think is still really valuable. So, quick bit of audience participation. Imagine you're in a team. Let's say you're in a team of like 5 or 10 people. There's a mix of junior developers, mid-level, senior developers, all different kinds of people. Who do you think should be the first reviewer of a pull request? Anyone got any thoughts? Doesn't matter. Like, there's no. Well, don't worry about getting it wrong. I don't think there's like a right or wrong answer. Any thoughts?
I'd probably want somebody who's sort of like same level as me. So if I was a junior dev, I'd probably be looking for another junior dev, just like out of confidence.
Yeah, cool. Anyone else want to chip in with any thoughts? Cool. So I agree with what Jugi says. What Jugi said, I think there are also other perspectives. I would say the first reviewer is actually yourself. So if you've got 2 people who need to review your pull request, I would say add a third one in your mind, and the third one, or the first person is actually yourself. So sorry for the trick question. And we'll come on to that in a sec. So when you come to navigating a pull request, there's a few things. I mean, you might have seen all this already, but there's a few tabs. Certainly if you're looking at GitHub, there's a conversation. So that's got the description of the pull request, and it's got if there's any kind of comments, they'll appear below there as people comment on it. There's a list of commits. If you've got automated checks running like tests, that's where that tab is. And then the code is in that file change tab. So what I would recommend doing is do it for yourself first, and you could have the pull request in draft at this point. There's all the things that we're going to come and talk about. I think they apply to like other people reviewing it, but I would always say we each need to kind of do this review first. And you might have done a lot of this as you're actually going through and kind of building up your pull request and doing the work on it. But I think do a check yourself first. I often find at this stage I end up adding 2 or 3 new commits to the pull request before I kind of send it off for review at this point, because looking at it with kind of fresh eyes, sometimes I might even like make a cup of tea, go away, come back to it. But kind of if you sit down and go through it line by line, that's when I often spot lots of just stupid stuff that I've done, basically, because we're all human. So yeah, this would be kind of one of my like top recommendations. So these are some of the things to look for, and we're going to go through each of these things in this list. I put it as some things to look for because it's probably not everything to look for. Like a lot of this is comes down to kind of good practice in software development, and that will obviously vary a bit depending on the kind of project it is. There are probably some things that I've just forgotten in this list, so please don't take this as exhaustive, but hopefully it's helpful to give you some ideas as a bit of a reference. I'd also say, although I put these in a kind of broken out into a list of 10 things just to make it a bit easier to talk about, it's not, I wouldn't normally kind of go through things 10 times and look at it, each time for something different, but it's kind of things to have in your mind, really. And roughly the list is in order of, I think, broadly, things are a bit easier towards the top of the list and things that maybe are a bit more challenging towards the bottom of the list. But I think what I tend to find is when I'm reviewing pull requests is that probably the majority of my comments, like 80, maybe 90%, are in the top half of that list. And I think those are all things pretty much that we could all, certainly most of them, maybe not all of them, but quite a few of the things we could all find, whatever your level of experience. So, but I'd also say if you think, oh, I'm someone who's not too experienced, don't look at the bottom of the list and go, oh, I can ignore that. or I can't do that because it's too difficult. I don't want you to think that either. Yeah, it's just a kind of, there's a bit of a flow in terms of some things are a bit easier than others. So the first thing I'd probably look for is, does it work? So I'd look at like what the ticket says it was meant to do, what the pull request description says, and if there's a way that I can kind of say run it on my local machine, you know, look at a test app or a test site using the code. I basically, does it work? Probably the next thing I'd look at as part of that is, does it obviously seem to have broken anything else that's kind of related to it? Is there kind of some of the existing functionality maybe that relies on some of the same code? Is that all still working? So that's kind of one of the first things that I'd probably start to think about. And we'll touch on a little bit more of that later as well. You might want to pull the code to your local machine. That can be quite useful. Well, it's useful if you're kind of going to run it locally, but also sometimes if you need to kind of dive into your code editor and look at stuff in a bit more detail, that can be handy. So that's step one. Obviously, there's a bit more to it than that, so we can't just kind of stop at that stage, unfortunately. So I check in a bit more detail, like, does it follow the brief? Does it do what the ticket asks? Does it follow the design? And then sometimes when I get into this, when I'm reviewing, so obviously if you're the person working on this, the person who created the pull request, hopefully you'd have asked these questions at a kind of earlier stage. But this is definitely something sometimes when I'm reviewing, or actually I kind of go back and like, is the design clear enough? Or is the ticket clear enough? So this example on the right there, this is a screen from the STA volunteer app. Lovely design for a project details screen. Now, I remember reviewing the pull request for this, and when I looked at it, I was like, okay, so that is a screen where everything nicely fits, right? So that video and the text and all those headings nicely fits on the screen, and then there's a button at the bottom. But then I start to think, okay, what if the text was longer? Should that button kind of flow down? So you have to scroll down further to get it, which would be one option. Or is that button meant to be kind of fixed at the bottom of the screen so that even if you have to scroll up and down to read all the text on here, is that button meant to be kind of stuck there so that it's always kind of easy to tap? And you know, you look and there's no kind of notes on the design that tell me. So that's a kind of example where it's just good to kind of go back to the designer and say, you know, what do you think about this? Or if you've got a UX person, you know, how should this work? So yeah, sometimes it's things like that, but there might be things on the ticket itself, that functionality. And again, it's kind of not in order to annoy people or just to slow everything down, but I think it's good to kind of, it's like keep asking questions and dive into the kind of details and make sure that it, you know, it really does what it needs to do. Then I'd say like another important aspect, or important aspects, plural, is thinking about whether it's usable, whether it's accessible. Now, in some ways, you could say as a developer, that's not really my job. If you're in a company, you might have people who's like dedicated to UX. You might have people who test for accessibility and all those kinds of things. I think like, because I'm used to working as a freelancer or often for charities where they have quite small budgets and small teams, you don't have all of those functions. But I think I'd always say, I think to some extent we all need to kind of be thinking about this stuff, because the more eyes we can have on how to make things really nicely usable and accessible, I think is really important. On accessibility, you might see some things in the code where actually, oh, hang on, there's like a setting we could use that would make this more accessible, that, you know, nobody else in the project, you know, your UX or your designer or whoever would even know to kind of ask for. So that might be one example. I quite often find on projects, I have to push back to clients and kind of be sometimes the lone voice kind of pushing for accessibility. So I think it's really important. I think on usability, so there's an example here on the right. So this is, again, a screen from the volunteer app. So if you say you want to volunteer for a project, you hit volunteer now and you get this little pop-up. It's called a modal. So the application received. I found when I was testing it, I was like, what I naturally wanted to do to make it go away again afterwards, because it doesn't go away by itself, that little message, is I wanted to kind of tap on it to make it go away. But the way it worked by default is you have to tap anywhere else on the screen. So I was like, kind of hitting this thing with my finger, like, why hasn't it gone? And And that nothing was broken. And we were using a module that's out of the box with like a component system that's kind of off the shelf. But it's just, but it's something that the kind of flat designs on a page also wouldn't tell us. So it's just, sometimes it's just think about those little things, because you are one of the people in the chain. And, you know, yeah, maybe it is more of someone else's job, but I think it's just trying to kind of do our best, like at every stage. There's obviously on usability and on accessibility, there's obviously reams and reams of stuff that we could talk about that, but that's probably kind of another topic or for other talks, because there's kind of loads to go into. So sorry, I can't go into details, but I think these are things we need to be definitely thinking about. Make sure you haven't got stuff in there that doesn't belong. So kind of seeing this reasonably often. Things like VS Code, or if you're on a Mac, it creates these like idea directories. It's like your system, I think Windows occasionally does other things. They create these kind of little system files, and it's really easy to just add them in by accident. And then they're kind of in the pull request, they get into the code base, and we don't want them there, we don't need them there. The bottom right, the thing I said about watch out. So I've often found it's when people are using, not to bash it, and I think maybe it works for a lot of people, but adding and committing files, you can do it using VS Code or another code editor. I've quite often found that's when files get added in kind of accident, because it can be easy to kind of not quite notice everything you've added. Or if you're doing it on the command line, if you use git add and then a dot, which adds kind of everything, that can be a bit dangerous, because you don't quite know what you're adding. So it can be safer to do git status, that tells you all the files that have changed, and then you can kind of git add like individual files and just be a bit more careful. But also when you're doing that line by line checking in your pull request before you're sending it to other people, that's also another place to spot this. And you might need to update your git ignore file, and that will then kind of mean that these kind of system files will hopefully should kind of never be included. A few other things to look for that you don't want to include. So sometimes we all write comments to ourselves when we're kind of debugging something or we're trying to develop it. Make sure you haven't left any in that are not kind of intentionally there for other people. We might have also left in some kind of extra code. Maybe we were, trying something out and we kind of left it in. It's really easy to leave in, I find, like imports or libraries. So like that one there as an example. Sometimes your code editor, so you'll see where it says import modal, it's got a little yellow squiggly line. Like sometimes your code editor will kind of flag those things to you, but you have to kind of look out for them. So, and if you did leave in an import like that, like it's not the end of the world, but it's we're kind of then bloating the app or the website with kind of extra code that it doesn't need. It will load a bit slower, and it might be, could be a little bit buggier. So it's just good practice to kind of leave those out. Making things clear and consistent and tidy is I think is good. So make sure you're following the coding style of the project. You can set up like things like ESLint and pretty other kind of linting formatting tools. They can make that automatic, so it should work with your code editor. But sometimes if like maybe that hasn't been set up, so it's not automatic, or maybe like a setting is being overridden in your code editor. Sometimes this is where again it's useful to look at the line by line of a pull request. You might see suddenly lots of things have changed, but it's just, I don't know, like a semicolon has appeared or disappeared, or quotes have been changed from double to single. So just kind of looking out for that stuff, because we just don't, it's not stuff we want to change. And also for anyone reviewing it, it has lots more changes. Suddenly your pull request looks a lot harder to review. So it's good to avoid that. Think about, I think also this is where it's useful having a second set of eyes, like naming files and variables and functions. I have definitely had that before, like on the volunteer app we're working on, someone coming in and they might say, oh, I'm a much more junior kind of developer. They came in and were like, oh, I don't quite understand what that function does. And it was literally just because I hadn't named it very clearly. So again, like we're all learning, and it's really useful to have other people's eyes on it. I think like the best thing can be is if your code by itself is clear, kind of makes sense, but sometimes it is useful to have comments that kind of bring something to light. So showing an example there of where like, something's got like a different value, compared to the other things in the list, like why is that? So sometimes a bit of explanation is just useful for anyone who's kind of coming to it in the future to understand why it's done a certain way. Magic numbers, there's a link there if you don't know about those. But you know, it's like something, I don't know, as something is set to 273, and you look at it and you're looking at the code like, why is that set to 273? What does that mean? Like, what does that equal? Like, what is the significance of it? So just like, and that can be as simple as having a descriptive constant or variable, or there can be other ways of dealing with it. And the last one on that list, sometimes when we're working on things, and this can happen as we're kind of maybe adding new features to something, is like files become kind of really big. So it's good practice if we can kind of split things out. So maybe like split things into like other modules, smaller components, and that just makes everything easier to navigate and kind of easier to maintain. Right, so moving on. So this is where it probably starts to get a little bit trickier, but thinking about how can things be kind of reusable in the future? And some of this, it's a little bit kind of like imaginative time travel. You kind of have to think about not just the ticket, the task I'm working on right now, but you know, how might I want to use this in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, or how might someone else want to use this? So an example here. So it's that same screen that we looked at just a minute ago, that modal, so that kind of little pop-up message there. So originally, this was coded as a thing on the left. I know you can't see the whole of it. I'll just show you the beginning of it, but it's like a modal that only shows a response from an API. But when we looked at it, actually, what this does, it is just basically we've taken a modal from this component library and we've customized it to how we want to use it and styled it and so on. But it doesn't just have to show a response from an API. It could show any message if we just make it a little bit more adaptable. And also we could maybe add like a button. So maybe we need to like give people, you know, like okay or cancel or something like that. And so actually with just a little bit of work, and the version on the right, and I appreciate you're only seeing the beginnings of it as well, but it's just, we kind of starting to change it and we're saying, right, okay, this becomes just a modal that can be used for anything. It doesn't just have to be for a response from an API. So it's something then that can be reused anytime we need to show like a message, like a kind of confirmation message or something on screen. So sometimes it's just kind of thinking ahead beyond the task we're working on, without making the thing we're working on, you know, too onerous, like making it take, we don't want to kind of create like tons and tons of extra work for ourselves either. So it's kind of finding that balance, but thinking where things can be sensibly reused. Documentation, I have to say, I definitely used to be terrible at this, and I'd say I'm like in recovery. I'm like slowly getting better, and I think like working on a volunteer project, I particularly found like I've seen the importance of documentation because maybe it's a little bit different to a work environment, although it'd be important there too. Is because with volunteer projects, we're often like people coming and going. You know, someone might come and volunteer, maybe stay on a project for a few months, and then maybe they have to, for whatever reason, you know, they drop out. Someone else comes in. So there's quite a lot of kind of coming and going, and so much better than relying on the knowledge in people's heads is kind of putting it down on not I was going to say on paper, on the screen somewhere. So yeah, that can be things like README files. I know some people prefer using like you can create wikis, you know, there are other ways of doing it. But I think kind of setting stuff out, and also then you're empowering new developers who come into a project, is like they can kind of get up to speed quicker, and it makes it a lot easier. Somewhere where I worked in a house, we had the we had the exact opposite of this. There was basically, apart from a bit of like how you get set up in your dev environment, there was zero documentation. Like nothing about the database or the data structures, nothing about how the code base worked, like nothing about how the systems fit together. And it was because it was like 4 guys, and they were guys, who had just all been working together for like 3 or 4 years, and it was basically, it was horrible coming as a new person, because you're basically at sea and like there's nothing there to kind of help you. You have to ask everything, and it's just quite a kind of difficult, painful way of doing things. And then if someone leaves or gets sick or whatever, or we just forget things, then there's nowhere to kind of find that. So yeah, like definitely documentation, like really, really important, and think of it in your pull request, not as a kind of separate thing. Right, we are close to the end of the list. Thanks for sticking with it. So thinking about things that could go wrong or stopping them going wrong. So test coverage, if you've got automated tests set up, then, or tests like unit tests or other kind of like tests set up on your repository, that obviously can be a better way to check that nothing's broken. Has the pull request kind of added to those tests? Like if you've got new functionality, is there a new test? Or if you change functionality, have we changed the test? So all of that is important. Think about error handling. So it's easier, like, again, I've done this loads of times myself. You kind of build, so let's say you're building something that like goes and talks to an external API, maybe it gets some data, and then you get the data back and you do something with the data, you show it on screen. Great, lovely, fantastic. But that won't always work. It might only fail one time out of 100 or 1,000, but you want to kind of have dealt with that. So what happens if a network connection fails? What happens if an external API returns no data? While we were waiting for this call to start, Joanna was talking about what does the volunteer app do if there's nothing in the list? It's like, have we thought about all those kind of eventualities? And then another one I find useful is to think about unusual data. So take an example, the STA volunteer app. At the moment, we show the entire project description on each project card. But if someone put in a really long one, as you scroll through that list, it will just be enormous. Like we don't cut it off anywhere. We don't say we'll only show more detail on a project detail screen. So I was thinking about if people, or maybe if you've got a form and you're asking people for like feedback or something, what if they put in really large strings? Like, are you validating it? Are you stopping them kind of typing in too much? How do you deal with it? Things like large numbers as well. I worked on a project recently for charity. It's donations, and we were using this WordPress plugin. And what we didn't spot for a while until real users ran into it was that it would go wrong if someone tried to donate over £1,000. And the reason that was, you get into four figures by that point, and then this plugin was automatically putting in a comma, but we were validating that value as if it was a number, but because I had a comma in, basically it broke it. So the people you most want to donate, because you want these large amounts of money for your cause, were the only people who couldn't use it, and it took a while to find that out. And believe me, you do not want to receive that email from the head of fundraising. So thinking about, kind of like large or maybe very small values can be really helpful as well. Like I say, I'm definitely still learning. And sometimes unusual user behavior as well. What happens if people don't click the buttons in the order you think, or they leave it and come back to it, all of those kinds of stuff. Again, that might be someone else's job in the team, but it can be a good thing to think about. Right, security is really important. And I've got no details on the slide because I tried to think about something. It's quite hard to sum up because the security that you're building for like different projects, just the considerations could be quite different. And there's at least a whole other, probably multiple talks that we could organize in the STA about security, and I hope we do, because I think it's really important. So I'm sorry I haven't got any kind of useful like tips and links, but it is really important. So yes, it is important. And then the last on the list is kind of around like best practice or patterns. So there's things like, are you using like the latest like features you could in the language that you're using? So if you're in JavaScript, are you using like modern like ES6 or ES7 type features? But and that will obviously vary by language. Sometimes they might. This is the kind of thing where it doesn't necessarily stop. Might not stop your code working, but it's it will just make your code a bit neater. You're like a bit easier to read, perhaps. So it's kind of making use of those. If you're using external frameworks or libraries, like are you following the guidance from that? So on the volunteer app, the STA volunteer app, we switched a few months ago to a component library called Native Base, and then we had to kind of deal with like a whole load of pull requests of people using it, adding new kind of features and components and screens to the app and updating them. And like when I was reviewing these, like I often didn't know. I was like, is that the right way to to format a heading, or is that way to set the size, right way to set the size of something? Or is that the right way to use colors? I didn't know, and often you might not do. So it was kind of going and basically reading, kind of checking the documentation. Often, sadly, like online documentation can be a bit rubbish, but like the more you can find out from it, the better. So trying to follow that. And then the last point on here is something that I'm not very good at, I would say, but it's kind of following patterns. So it's there are patterns in software development. How other people tackled it, and not just a kind of hacky solution that someone has put on Stack Overflow, but kind of what are kind of good approaches that other people are using. And that can take a bit of research, and hopefully that happens not necessarily at the pull request review stage, but maybe earlier. Someone goes and does a bit of research, but it can be something to think about definitely when when we're reviewing stuff. So that is the end of the list of 10. So I've just got a few more slides. So I think one question in all of this, because I've obviously touched on loads and loads of issues there, is like, how good is good enough? And this, I think, is where it gets very subjective. I am a bit of a perfectionist, and I know that that's a tendency that I need to be careful of. Some of us probably have different tendencies. So what I've done is I've put on this slide a few contradictory quotes to kind of leave you with the paradox of this. But it's kind of trying to do your best about something, but also, that thing of like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like, let's not spend forever getting something absolutely incredibly perfect in every single way when it's good enough. And one of the things you can do is if maybe during a review it raises some issues about, oh, hang on, we should be refactoring something, or we should be doing something a different way, that could then become a separate ticket, right? A separate task for later that you or someone else could pick up. I think one of the things to be wary of is kind of technical debt. So like storing up problems for the future, basically. We all stick junk in our attics. I haven't got an attic, I'm in a bungalow, but you know what I mean. We all kind of keep that stuff, but it does mount up over time. You can get a quick fix on your car when there's got a problem and it goes to the garage, or you can get it properly fixed. And I think it's trying to find the balance between those things, because it can be time consuming to really, if it raises like an issue and something does need refactoring, that can take time, but that might save more time later. So it's kind of, there are trade-offs, and I think it's like a discussion and working out kind of what's the right thing for the right time. And some of that might be you just need to get that feature out the door because you've got a client who's screaming for it, or your company is, needs it to happen. So it's got to be kind of real world. It's got to be pragmatic. As the reviewer, when you come to provide feedback, so you might well have done this already. If not, there's a couple of screenshots on the right. So the top one is if you're adding a comment. So if you hover your mouse over like a line number, because with probably most things you're going to be commenting on like a particular line or a particular bit of code, click on that, you can leave a comment and then click the button to start a review. And then once you've done all of your comments, up at the top on the files list in your pull request, there's review changes, and usually what you'd pick at this point is either approve if it's all fine, or request changes if there are some things, if you put some comments in, it's things that need addressing first. So with all of that, and this kind of goes back to principles at the beginning, like be clear. I worked with one guy who thought he was being really helpful to me by leaving kind of cryptic comments. I think he thought I would become a better developer by kind of going and researching the things he said, except they were so cryptic. Most of the time I'd spend 2 hours like trying to look them up, but because he hadn't said enough, I was just lost basically. So be clear enough. That doesn't mean you have to like give someone the exact, the full answer. Like obviously it it is the job ultimately of the person kind of doing the pull request, but you know, don't leave them stranded either, essentially. Be kind. So, you know, someone has worked hard on it, particularly if we're in the STA community, we're all volunteers, we're all doing it in our own spare time. But equally, you know, if you're working in like a work environment as well, you know, someone spent time doing it, they've probably done their best, even if it's got problems, they've tried. Be encouraging. It can be, you know, it can sometimes be difficult kind of if you get feedback, especially if it's like 15, you know, you've got 15 comments and you're, oh, I just want to get that thing done. So, you know, be encouraging to people. If you're reviewing and you're like, you've got a question, don't just think, yeah, it's fine. And then just, you know, plow on, do ask. And if you have requested comments, make sure you kind of stay responsive, because certainly, I don't know about other platforms, certainly the way it works on GitHub is, if you, I didn't realize this until recently, if you request changes, so that this box says on right, if you request changes, then, and someone then makes the changes, you have to hit approve later, or GitHub will kind of block it from being merged. So don't ask for changes and then basically kind of disappear or not respond when someone follows up. Equally, don't just approve something because someone else does. This did happen kind of recently on the volunteer app project. Someone, I think they absolutely meant well, but were like, well, Joe approved it, so I think it's probably okay, so I'm approving it. And I had to say, like, I'm, you know, you're assuming that I've caught everything, and I wouldn't necessarily. So, you know, always kind of think through it yourself. There might not be some, you know, some of the code might be like challenging for you, but do your absolute best to try and review it from your own perspective. And the last thing on this one is, you know, if you're getting into a bit of a conversation about how do we do this or whatever, not everything kind of works through doing comments on the pull request itself. You know, it's not the best place to have a discussion. So you might need to switch to, you know, talking in person or Zoom or Slack or whatever. And that is pretty much it. So I know I've kind of rattled through that, but we do have 5 minutes left. So yeah, I'd love to open it out if anyone's got questions or maybe different experiences. Is there something different that you do in like a project or a team that you've worked in? Anything wasn't clear, anything you disagree with is also absolutely fine. Feel free to jump in.
Hi, Joe. Hi, Joe. I don't have any questions per se, but I just want to say thank you for your talk and taking us through how it relates to the volunteer app as well, and different aspects of that when you've been going through and how to build that. Because it's really useful for me learning about how you guys have developed that and how we can roll that out to the volunteers as well. So thank you for that. It's great.
Cool. Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody got any questions? It's okay if you don't. Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, it was good, Joe. I don't have any questions. I'm just going to expand on something you said about security. So for everybody else that's doing PRs, security is, you're quite right, a topical on its own. But the two things I would definitely look out for is people putting things like API keys, secret keys, that kind of good stuff. Anything that should be sitting in a .env file, just that's worth keeping an eye out for, because when it happens, GitHub will pick up that you've put something you didn't mean to put in there. Probably will pick it up, and it may alert the client. So it's probably worth double checking for that, because I've seen it in a couple of projects and immediately they go straight to Joanna and all hell breaks loose, and it's usually something trivial that we can revoke quite quickly. And that's really common with anything that's hosted in Heroku. So if it's something you're doing in Heroku, I'd probably watch out for that, because it seems to pick them up quite effectively. And the second one is, I can't stress this strongly enough, Sophos has a podcast weekly. It's about 20 minutes and it tells you what the current threats are. I'll dig out a link to it and stick it in the chat, but it's really worth keeping on top of, just so you're aware of what those current like big issues are. And that can kind of give you something to sort of look at when it comes to security. But yeah, I'm not an expert by any means, but that's what I do. That's what I look out for anyway.
Brilliant. Oh, that's really helpful. Cool. Thanks a lot. That is much better than my blank slide with a GIF on it. And just in case anyone joined after I shared this at the beginning, I'm just popping in the chat again. There's a link to the slides. So if you want to go and look those up later, follow any of the links. And I think, Joe, will the video of this be kind of shared on like the STA Slack or something at some point?
Yeah. So I'll stop the recording now, and I'll share it with anybody who wasn't able to attend as well, and had signed up as well. So that'll be great.
Brilliant. Cool. Great stuff. All right, great. Well, unless there's anything else, I think we'll leave it there. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks so much.